The second lesson is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, and in it we hear Jesus telling a parable. For it will be as when a man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted them with his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. And then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents, and here I've made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master. He who also had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sowed and gather where I have not scattered. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is the word of the Lord. Let us pray. On this September morning, O God, meet us where we are and open our hearts to you. Amen. I'll be back. You remember, it's the catchy phrase from Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 80s movie The Terminator. Schwarzenegger is this menacing robot or a droid, and he says this line to a police officer in his monotone Austrian voice. He does come back, crashing his car into the police station. So in one of Jesus' most familiar parables, the parable of the talents, I was thinking he could have used this line, I'll be back. You know the story, right? It's the parable of the talents. It simply goes like this. A rich and powerful master gathers his 3 servants, and he says he's going on a long journey. And he gives them bags of gold called talents. It was actually a measure of weight. In the Greek, the word is the talenton, which ironically sounds a lot like talents, which is the English word that we think that this talent is about. But each bag of gold was worth an enormous amount of money. So To each of the three servants, he gives these bags equal to their ability. The first receives 5 million, for instance. The second receives 2 million. The third one receives 1 million. Then the master leaves. He's gone a long time, and he comes back, and he wants to know what they've done with his money. Well, you know what happens. The first has doubled his master's money from 5 million to 10, and the second's doubled it from 2 to 4 million. And to each, the master says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But the last servant comes to his master, and he says to him, "Hey, I know that you are a hard master, and so being afraid, I dug a hole in the ground and buried the money." And he returned exactly what had been given to him. And when the master hears this, he is beside himself. He calls the servant wicked and lazy, and then he takes the 1 talent and he gives it to the servant who already has 10 talents, $10 million worth of gold. Now, the ending bothers us, right? I mean, most of us pull for the underdog. We already understand that the 1 talent person has less talent than the others. Or maybe we think about it this way. Does he have less ability because he is lazy, or because he is wicked in that he has bad moral character, and that's what causes the diminishment of his ability? Maybe that's it. But however we interpret this, the bottom line of the parable seems to be this: God gives each person talent or ability or whatever we want to call it, and the issue that Jesus is focused upon is not how much talent one person has, but what a person does with what he or she does have, right? Well, when it comes to talent or ability, many of us play a game where we often say, or we often believe, well, I'm not a very talented person. If you want to see somebody talented, then look at John or look at Jane. Now, they really have talent, but me, not so much. Which is a form of flattery for John and Jane, right? But it also has a way for us to shift any responsibility away from us for using the ability or the talent that we do have, right? I mean, it helps us to rationalize that it's okay to be mediocre, or it's okay not to risk or use what we do have. It's like the student who always takes the easiest classes rather than those that will challenge him or her, or classes that will push them beyond their comfort zone. It's chasing the safe way, the easy way. Well, you and I often think of the bad guys, the villains, as those who hurt people, those who cheat and steal, or those whose character is mean-spirited. But what this parable challenges you and me to do is to think differently about villains and sin. The Greek word for sin is harmatia, and it means literally missing the mark as in an arrow that misses the mark of a bullseye, for instance. Our sin, then, is missing the mark of what God intends for us. right? Get it? So the sin of the third servant is that of playing it safe with his master's money. He missed the mark of what the master intended for him to do and intended him to be. You heard about multiple intelligence? It's based on the work of Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner. And he says that we've been studying intelligence all wrong. He says that standard IQ tests measure only one or two forms of intelligence. He says that his research shows that there are actually 9 forms of intelligence. For instance, the linguistically gifted are the writers and the poets. The logically, mathematically gifted are accountants and financial planners and scientists. The spatially gifted are artists and architects. The kinesthetically gifted are our great athletes and dancers. The interpersonally gifted are counselors, teachers, salespeople. The introspectively gifted are thinkers, philosophers, professors, theologians. The musically gifted are our talented musicians. The naturalists, as Gardner calls them, are great in horticulture and are ecologists. The existentially gifted are spiritually in tune with God and the world. You get the idea, right? Here's the punchline. Gardner claims that everyone he has ever tested has scored high on at least one of the categories. So the question is not, are we smart and gifted? Rather, how are we smart and gifted? In what are we smart and gifted? So the master says, I'm giving you this ability, this talent, this money, these resources, and I'm going on a journey, and I'll be back. Many of us have heard of Carol Dweck, the Stanford psychologist, whose research shows that intelligence, ability, and talent is developmental, not fixed. That people who approach life as a series of learning opportunities increase their skill, increase their talent, increase their intelligence. Here's your talent. Use it or lose it. I'll be back. Now, did you hear the last servant's reason for burying his talent? I was afraid. I was afraid, he said. Haven't we discovered that people either operate with an external system or an internal system? And when we operate with an external system, we believe that it is the outside circumstances that direct and determine our life. And when we have this external operating system, and you ask us, well, why are you having all these problems? We will say, because of all these external circumstances, which have caused all these problems in my life. My mother was an alcoholic. The schools I attended weren't all that good. My husband doesn't understand me. My boss is a rat. Plus a litany of external circumstances that determine for us why life is the way it is. When you and I operate externally, we are fearful because we are just waiting for the next outside circumstance to derail us and to negatively direct our life. So the third servant, operating externally, hid his master's money. Why? He was afraid. So what Jesus is encouraging us to do and to be and to think in this parable is to have faith enough, to have trust enough to take risk. Not for the sake of taking risk, but for the sake of the things that we believe in, right? That kind of risk-taking faith is driven from an internal perspective that is grounded in our belief in God, that God will be with us all along the way. Which means that being a follower of Jesus with gifts, with talents, with ability, with money, with influence, means we are not allowed to play it safe. That there's an element of risk and risk-taking that is the very nature of faith. I mean, what a message for the church. What a message for this church. I mean, I am sinfully proud of what we've done in renovating the sanctuary and the Smith building and other facilities. I mean, we took an historic, beautiful, but tired buildings and brought them into the 21st century. It was risky. It was a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of money. But we did it, and we did it well. But what's next? We become the church for at least 50 immigrant Christian families who have roots in the Congo. And we are doing some important work helping them with their transition into American culture. There's a new worship service now on Sunday afternoon that gives focus toward the Congolese community. And we're working with basic needs for families. But what's next? I mean, what are we willing to risk in this? Or we've seen the fragile state of race relations in our country, and it's been so obvious to us of late. So what are we willing to do here at First Presbyterian? I mean, can we take our considerable influence, combine it with our faith, and make a difference in Greensboro? Are we willing to risk that? Are we? We've seen the images, first from Houston and now from the Florida Keys, Florida, St. Thomas, St. Martin. I mean, it is awful. So what does it mean to respond for us? I hear we've given around $2,000 for hurricane relief. That figure could be 10 times that amount for us to make a real difference. Faith is risky. It's a lot easier to dig the holes than to put our money and our faith in those holes. Which is to say, there is a sin in playing it safe. There is a sin in not using our talents well and not risking with our talents. I mean, it's a message for all of us who are the followers of Jesus. It's a message for us in the church. And let us remember, faith is often a journey without real maps, without clear maps. I mean, part of the risk of faith is knowing that when we step out in faith, we hardly ever end up where we think we're heading, right? The late Edwin Freeman was a Jewish rabbi, as a family therapist. he was an expert in organizational development and leadership. And he wrote some really important books before his death. But one of his passions was maps, old maps. And so he studied the old maps of explorers like Columbus and da Gama and Magellan and Francis Drake and others. And one of the things that he concluded is that all of these explorers based their journeys on maps that were completely wrong. Columbus did not discover India. Magellan did not prove that sailing west was the shortcut for ending up in the east. And Lewis and Clark, they never found the secret inland passageway. They did not end up where they thought they were heading. But their journeys ended up in great discoveries that turned out to be extraordinary. And that is the way of faith. We never end up where we think we're going. Rather, with faith, we rely on God to move us into God's direction. Faith is a risk. It is a risk-taking venture using God's God-given talents to us, which God gives them to us for a purpose. And then God says, I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back.